Welcome back, capital F football fans, to the O&O Sports YouTube channel. Today, we begin our 2025 season previews, starting, of course, with the 2024 national champions, the Ohio State Buckeyes. As always, be sure to like and subscribe if you do enjoy the video, and follow us on our social medias for big updates and news throughout this offseason. Links to those will be in the description below. Now, let's take a look back at how the Buckeyes did in 2024. 14-2 overall, technically 8-2 in conference with a win in their rematch against Oregon in the Rose Bowl. 4 playoff wins, a top 4 offense and defense nationally, and of course, they hoist the 2024 National Championship trophy, Ryan Day's first ever national title victory, but that's not to say it was a perfect season by any means. They made up for their early loss to Oregon on the road with that win in the Rose Bowl, but they lose their 4th consecutive game against Michigan. Definitely not what you want to see. Does the streak end this year? And will the Buckeyes be back in the national title picture this season? Let's jump into it, starting with a look at Ohio State's schedule this season. Taking a look here. Now, off first impressions, this schedule doesn't look that bad, but the Buckeyes away slate really adds a level of difficulty that they may not have seen last year in the regular season at least. And in 2024, they really only had 3 true away games, with the 4th being the Wrigley Field neutral site game against Northwestern. But this season, they've got a full set of 5. They're all relatively tough games, with the first being at Washington, a West Coast away game, which Ohio State hasn't performed that great in recent memory. Washington, also a team that reasonably could make a jump in year 2 under Jed Fish. They've got Damon Williams at quarterback, which could make that offense interesting. Then it's Illinois, who we think is a bit overrated coming into this year. They were a solid team last season, win their bowl game over South Carolina. Wisconsin, a team that probably will struggle again this year. Not super confident in them, but realistically, they're a team that could pull out an 8 or 9 win season if Luke Fickell can get it figured out there. Purdue could be a sneaky, dangerous team in year 1 with Barry Odom. A few short years ago, Purdue beats Ohio State at home. This is going to be at Purdue. And last, the Michigan Wolverines, pretty self-explanatory there. So a pretty nasty road schedule altogether, and they have a game against Texas in their home opener, the season opener, and they also play Penn State at home in their first week in November. Pretty gnarly stuff all around. Not the hardest schedule by any stretch, but definitely going to grade out on the higher end, but we'll get into those grades later in this video. First, let's take a look at the Buckeyes' biggest strengths this year. The biggest strengths for this Buckeye unit heading into this season are their 2 superstar players, Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith. This is a bit of a reloading year on either side of the ball. They lose a lot of talent, but they have 2 great players in those 2. It's going to make that transition period a little bit easier, especially for the coaching staff, who is also new this season. And keep in mind that those are our top 2 players in college football overall. Smith is 1, Caleb Downs is 2. You can see the rest of our top 50 on our social media, so be sure to follow us there. Downs specifically has a strong case to be the top pick in next year's draft as a defensive back, which is relatively unheard of. He's a do-it-all safety linebacker combo, and Jeremiah Smith almost goes without saying. He's just flat out one of the most talented wide receiver prospects we've ever seen. His speed and frame are unmatched at the college level, and there's no doubt in my mind that he'd go in the first round if he could. And that receiver room as a whole is also a big strength for this team. They do lose Emeka Egbuka, but they retain Carnell Tate, who actually outperformed Jeremiah Smith in Ohio State's final 2 playoff games, more receptions and more yards than Jeremiah Smith in those 2 games. They have Brandon Ennis, who was a composite top 5 wide receiver in the 2023 class, and they go out and add Max Clare, who was the shining beacon of hope for a Purdue team that was just terrible last year. He was an all 3rd team Big Ten tight end behind Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland, who both went in the first round in this draft. that tells you anything. And overall, their talent level is unmatched. They're going to be able to reload with weapons just fine. They have plenty of talent to go around on all sides. But that brings us to our weaknesses. Yes, while Ohio State is going to be one of the most talented teams year in and year out, they are in a massive transitional period. They lose both of their coordinators. Chip Kelly off to the NFL. He's now the Raiders offense coordinator. Penn State poaches Jim Knowles. They give him the absolute bag to be their defense coordinator, a move I don't think anybody saw coming. And in their places stepped longtime elite wide receiver coach Brian Hartline and former co-offensive coordinator. And they get former NFL journeyman coach Matt Patricia to be their defensive coordinator. Two hires that look pretty okay on paper, but it's going to have to be a wait and see year because we just really have no idea how those guys are going to perform at offensive and defensive coordinator. You're going from two of the best coordinators in the sport, maybe the best coaching staff period in the sport last year, to guys who have relatively low to no experience at the college football level in terms of coordinator experience. Patricia, never been a college coordinator, former head coach of the Lions, didn't go great. Former defensive coordinator for the Patriots during multiple Super Bowls, did go great. And while Hartline was the interim offensive coordinator, he does have a little bit of experience in 2023. That offense was around 30th in the country that season, and he has no real long-term experience to go off of. And not only that, but they're having to complete a massive roster overhaul. We want to reiterate that they have talent. They're not lacking talent, but they're losing virtually their entire offensive and defensive lines from last year. They lose their starting quarterback in Will Howard, their two starting running backs, arguably their best coverage defensive back in Denzel Burke, as well as 100 combined games of experience in that secondary in Lathan Ransom and Jordan Hancock. Essentially, all that is to say is that they lose a lot of talent and experience from last year's squad. And on top of that, their special teams was just all right last year, which isn't that important when you're scoring touchdowns like they were doing last year. But with a team like the one that's coming into this season, we could see that having a much bigger impact on the games. Their punter Joe McGuire was around 80th in the country in both gross and net punt yards, meaning even if the punt coverage was solid, he was mid at best. But a lot of the times the punt coverage just wasn't solid. They were around 60th in yards allowed per punt, which may sound nitpicky, but again, it's something that could affect the team much more negatively if you're not scoring touchdowns most of the time like they were last year. And now let's look at our grades for this Ohio State team. This is on our patented 100-point system. Naturally, in these videos, the teams we go over will probably be much higher on this scale, so be sure to follow us on our social medias if you want to see other teams. We're going to go over every single FBS team on our social medias this year, so be sure to follow us. Once again, we go over the good, the bad, and the ugly there. But let's take a look at Ohio State's offense, which we are giving a 92 flat, just barely an A- on our scale. Jeremiah Smith and that wide receiver room are easily the best unit on that side, but the revamped offensive line protecting a first-year starter in either Julian Sayin or Lincoln Kineholz will bring this number down significantly from last season. The running back room is also drastically less talented, but still talented. As for the defense, we're going a bit harsher at a 90.5. You bring in quality talent, including a guy like Bo Atkinson, to strengthen the experience of that defensive line, but you just can't lose that much production on that side of the ball and expect to stay at an elite grade. They're still a great unit with a ton of talent, but not enough experience returning on the line or in the secondary for us to justify a higher grade here. As for special teams, like we said, not their greatest strength, actually their biggest weakness in terms of these grades. Jaden Fielding is a good but not elite kicker, especially if you saw him in that Michigan game. Not his greatest performance, ended up costing them that game more or less. But McGuire and the punt protection is fairly average, so we're grading this unit out at an 89.5, a B+. And as for coaching, yet another decrease from last year. Naturally going to see a big drop off when you lose the guys that you do. Already been over that. Patricia is a big wild card in our opinion. Could be a perfect fit, could be a disaster. And last, in terms of strength of schedule, Ohio State faces a very difficult road slate this year. On top of that, they have the games at home against Texas and Penn State. They'll get breaks in the action with the Purdue's, UCLA's of the world, but it is still very difficult, which rounds Ohio State out to a 91.5 overall, an A- for this upcoming season. Probably not what most Buckeye fans want to see, but a brutally honest review of their situation this year. You've got a lot of hurdles to jump over from top to bottom, and for what it's worth, this is still a very good grade by our metric. Still could have an amazing year. And speaking of which, let's jump into our predictions for Ohio State in 2025, starting with their absolute floor. We think that the worst case scenario for the Buckeyes is losing all 3 of their hardest matchups and dropping an extra game to a Washington, a Minnesota, one that you really wouldn't expect. If neither of your quarterbacks pan out the way you want them to, if your young lions get overwhelmed, we could see this easily being the case, which would put the Buckeyes at 8-4 on the season. A scary reality to live in coming off of a national championship victory. But as for their ceiling, we think they're capable and talented enough to win any game on their schedule. We're just not convinced this is a team that can beat every team on their schedule this year. We think at least one of their big 3 is going to be a loss. We couldn't say for sure which one. Texas, Penn State, Michigan. We think they lose at least one of those games this year, which puts their ceiling, in our opinion, at 11-1. And for our final prediction, we think the Buckeyes lose their first and last game of the 2025 season to Texas at home and Michigan in the Big House. Make it 5 in a row for the Wolverines. The Buckeyes will finish 10-2 in the Big 2025. A great year for the rebuild they're going through, but I have a sneaking suspicion the way they lose and who they lose to will be the bigger stories than just going 10-2. But with all that being considered, they went 10-2 in the regular season last year, and they ended up hoisting that big tube of lip gloss, the College Football National Championship. So, could be worse. Not all hope is lost. And with that, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.